There are moments when the universe behaves exactly the way science says it should, when the math lines up perfectly, when the predictions hold, when every instrument reading confirms what every textbook promised. Those moments are comfortable. They are reassuring. They remind us that we understand something, even if we don't understand everything. But then there are the other moments, the rare ones, the silent ones. The moments where something happens out in the dark that no equation predicted, no model anticipated, and no scientist wants to be the first to explain on the record. Voyager 1 just gave us one of those moments. And the more you understand what this spacecraft has been through over the past 47 years, the more terrifying the implications become. Voyager 1 is currently 155 astronomical units from the Sun. That is roughly 23 billion kilometers from Earth, traveling through a region of space no human-made object had ever reached before it arrived there. It launched in 1977, carrying instruments designed for short-term planetary flybys, a plutonium power source that loses energy every single year, thrusters that were never meant to last this long, and onboard memory smaller than a photograph on your phone. By every reasonable engineering standard, Voyager 1 should have gone silent decades ago. It didn't. It kept transmitting. It kept listening. And recently, something out there in the interstellar dark responded to it in a way that has quietly sent shockwaves through NASA's deep space network that the public has barely been told about. To understand why this matters, you have to go back to the beginning. You have to understand what Voyager actually survived on its way to becoming the farthest human-made object in existence. Because every leg of that journey added a layer of strangeness that, in hindsight, was building towards something. Jupiter was Voyager's first real confrontation with the unknown. Scientists expected a massive, dynamic planet. What they did not expect was the sheer violence of what they found. Lightning bolts 10 times more powerful than anything Earth produces. Radiation belts so intense they nearly overwhelmed Voyager's sensors. Volcanic eruptions on Io blasting sulfur and silicate hundreds of kilometers into space in plumes that looked almost alive. Jupiter didn't just surprise scientists, it humiliated their models. But buried inside all that electromagnetic chaos, there were pulses. Subtle, faint, rhythmic pulses that didn't match the rotation of Jupiter and didn't fit any expected fluctuation of its magnetosphere. At the time, engineers dismissed them as noise or incomplete modeling. They filed the anomalies away. Nobody thought much more about it. But today, decades later, with everything that has happened since, teams have gone back into those archived transmissions from Jupiter, and they are asking questions they weren't asking before. Because the pattern of those early pulses bears a strange resemblance to what Voyager detected much further out. And some researchers now believe those anomalies near Jupiter weren't noise at all. They were the first time something noticed us. Saturn was the last planet Voyager 1 would ever see. The flyby was extraordinary in every sense. The rings revealed complex wave patterns driven by gravitational resonances. Titan's atmosphere turned out to be thick, smog-covered, and chemically rich in ways that hinted at something almost primordial beneath. But more than the science, Saturn marked a turning point. The moment Voyager cleared Saturn's gravitational influence, it was flung outward on a trajectory that would never return. The sun began to shrink behind it. Signal delays grew from minutes to hours. Temperature dropped. The solar wind thinned. And with each passing year, Voyager drifted further from the comfortable, predictable physics of the inner solar system and closer to a region where nothing had ever been measured firsthand. Saturn's farewell, in retrospect, feels like the last moment of order before everything gets strange. Meanwhile, Voyager's twin continued outward toward Uranus and Neptune, two ice giants that behaved like the universe's way of reminding us how little we knew. Uranus was tilted completely on its side, a planet knocked over by some ancient, catastrophic collision, rotating in a way that made no intuitive sense. Neptune held the fastest winds ever recorded in the solar system, over 1,300 miles per hour, along with a massive dark storm system that appeared and then vanished without explanation. Triton, Neptune's largest moon, erupted with nitrogen geysers that spewed material into space before it froze and fell back as a kind of cosmic snow. And deep inside these ice giants, scientists believe diamonds literally rain downward through the pressurized mantle, sinking slowly toward the core. The deeper the Voyagers traveled, the more clearly the universe communicated one uncomfortable message. The rules we wrote for ourselves don't apply out here. Extremes are the norm. The strange is the standard. And if diamond rain and supersonic wind and sideways rotating planets can exist in our own solar system, then what might exist in the space beyond? That was the question nobody could answer until Voyager actually got there. To reach interstellar space, Voyager first had to cross the heliosphere, an enormous magnetic bubble carved out by the solar wind that surrounds the entire solar system. For decades, scientists theorized about its structure, its size, its behavior. Voyager was the first object that could actually take measurements from inside it as it moved outward toward the edge. What it found was not the smooth, predictable boundary that models had suggested. The heliosphere was turbulent. It pulsed like a living thing, expanding and contracting with the sun's activity cycles. The solar wind weakened and thinned as Voyager moved outward, the particles slowing, the pressure dropping, until eventually they were replaced by something denser and colder and more chaotic. Interstellar plasma, the sun's protective grip, did not fade gracefully. It ended with turbulence, with magnetic instability, with pressure waves that behaved more like a collision zone than a boundary. And as Voyager moved through that transition, its instruments recorded something that wouldn't be fully understood for years. Rhythmic pulses in the plasma, organized oscillations, patterns that repeated across time. NASA described them as unexpected plasma behavior. What they didn't say, at least not publicly, was how structured those patterns actually were. Once Voyager crossed the heliopause, the razor-thin frontier where the solar wind finally dies and interstellar space truly begins, everything changed. Cosmic rays arrived in relentless streams, each one a particle flung outward by a dying star or ancient supernova, carrying energies that dwarf anything produced naturally inside our solar system. Interstellar plasma moved like a cold ocean, dense and magnetically complex in ways Voyager's instruments had never been designed to measure. And yet they measured it. And what they found was that interstellar space was not empty or calm or quiet. It was structured, it was loud, it was organized in ways that implied forces and processes operating at scales we had never considered. Plasma waves formed natural harmonics, oscillating at regular intervals. Magnetic fields shifted in directions that seemed to respond to something unseen. The cosmic rays themselves arrived in complex patterns rather than random streams. Scientists expected to find a void. Instead, they found something that behaved almost like an environment, like a medium shaped by forces we hadn't mapped and couldn't yet explain. Voyager's plasma wave instrument, a piece of 1970s engineering that had no business still functioning this far into a mission that was supposed to last a few years, became the most important scientific tool humanity had ever deployed in deep space. The instrument detects oscillations in plasma and converts their frequency into data that can be analyzed. Sometimes NASA converts those frequencies into audible tones and releases them publicly as audio recordings of space. Those recordings are haunting, but what NASA has not released publicly are the anomalous harmonic patterns that the plasma wave instrument detected at irregular intervals deep inside interstellar space. Patterns that shifted suddenly, patterns that seemed to respond to external stimuli, patterns that repeated in ways inconsistent with random turbulence or natural wave behavior. At the time they were detected, researchers cautiously labeled them as unexpected phenomena requiring further study. Now, in the light of everything that has happened since, many in the mission team believe those harmonic anomalies were not simply the interstellar medium doing something unusual. They were something reacting to Voyager's presence. And if that's true, something out there has been watching this spacecraft for a very long time. There was also the hum. Years into interstellar travel, Voyager detected a faint, persistent vibration at an ultra-low frequency permeating the space around it. Not from the spacecraft itself, not from the sun, not from any identifiable star or cosmic event nearby. It was the background resonance of the interstellar medium, sometimes described poetically as the galaxy humming to itself in frequencies too low for anything human to hear. Scientists expected this hum to be consistent, smooth, a steady baseline. Instead, it fluctuated. It rose and fell in ways that didn't align with any known cosmic event. It shifted in timing and intensity in patterns that no model could explain. And when researchers later plotted the timeline of those fluctuations against the timeline of other anomalous events surrounding Voyager, a disturbing correlation emerged. The fluctuations appeared to intensify during the same periods that other strange phenomena were recorded. The hum wasn't just background noise. It may have been the earliest signal that something enormous was nearby, something whose presence was creating ripples in the medium long before it ever transmitted anything directly. Then Voyager's thrusters started behaving strangely. These hydrazine thrusters had been degrading for decades, which was expected. What was not expected was what happened when they appeared to malfunction. Commands sent from Earth began producing responses with timing delays that didn't match any mechanical explanation. Engineers noted irregular behavior and attributed it to aging aging hardware, but the anomaly deepened when the thrusters began spontaneously correcting themselves without any input from mission control. Voyager was maintaining antenna alignment toward Earth with a precision that a malfunctioning propulsion system should not have been able to achieve. If the craft were genuinely drifting or experiencing thruster failures, it should have lost stable Earth communication permanently. Instead, it stayed locked on more reliably than before. Something was helping it stay aligned. Nobody said that out loud in official briefings, but in the internal documentation reviewed after the new signal emerged, mission engineers noted the behavior as unexplained and flagged it for further analysis. That analysis took on a very different character once the rest of the evidence came in. Around the 40-year mark of the mission, Voyager began recording magnetic field distortions that lasted for weeks at a time. These weren't spikes or random fluctuations. They were smooth, sustained, monotonic changes in magnetic orientation, the kind of shift you would expect if the spacecraft had passed through a region with a structured engineered magnetic field, rather than the chaotic natural variations of the interstellar medium. One researcher described the readings as what you might expect if Voyager had traveled through the wake of something extremely large. At the time, the word object was not used in any formal report, but the description of the distortion itself implied geometry, size, and organization that natural processes struggle to produce. These distortions came and went without any corresponding cosmic event to explain them. No supernovae, no interstellar shocks, no solar activity, just smooth, prolonged, inexplicable changes in the magnetic environment surrounding a spacecraft 23 billion kilometers from home. And then the signal arrived. This is the part that NASA has not fully disclosed. Deep Space Network stations on Earth began receiving a transmission that did not originate from Voyager and did not originate from any terrestrial or orbital source. It came from deep space, from the region Voyager occupies. It was not noise. It was not static. It was not plasma interference or solar remnants or natural emission. It was structured. It was layered. It arrived in predictable intervals, synchronized with Voyager's own communication windows, as if whatever was transmitting it had learned the timing of the spacecraft's transmissions and was deliberately coordinating with them. Mission engineers ran full diagnostics across every antenna on Earth. They checked every possible source of interference. They reviewed every software artifact, every hardware anomaly, every possible explanation that science and engineering could provide. Nothing explained it. The signal came from the direction of Voyager. It was not Voyager, it was something else. NASA attempted to trigger a response by sending modified commands. They increased transmission power, they changed frequencies, they tested different modulation patterns. Nothing worked. The signal did not return during any of these forced experiments. It returned only when Voyager resumed its normal, consistent transmission cycle, as if the source of the signal could distinguish between routine behavior and deliberate experimentation. That distinction is what caused the deepest unease among the mission team. A natural phenomenon cannot recognize the difference between routine and experiment. A natural phenomenon does not wait for the spacecraft to behave consistently before choosing to respond. But whatever was out there appeared to do exactly that. It responded to Voyager's rhythm. It ignored NASA's attempts to force an interaction. It chose its moments, and that choice implies a kind of awareness that no astrophysical model accounts for. When engineers analyzed the structure of the signal more closely, they found something that has not been released in any official statement. The transmission contained structured sections separated by predictable silences, gaps that appeared in a deliberate pattern, repeating intervals that mirrored the format of compressed digital data, not language, not symbols, not mathematics in any recognizable form, but something resembling the architecture of a data packet. Headers followed by content, followed by structured pauses. Precision that no natural source produces. Whatever sent this signal organized it in a way that implied not just intelligence, but familiarity with the concept of structured communication, as if whoever or whatever transmitted it understood that receiving parties would need structure to decode meaning. That understanding is not something the interstellar medium accidentally generates. Then came the movement. By analyzing Doppler shifts in the signal over time, researchers detected that the source was not stationary. It was moving. But not the way a comet moves, not the way an asteroid drifts, not the way any passive object behaves when subject to gravitational forces. The movement was coordinated. It was smooth. It was accelerated in ways that suggested propulsion or controlled maneuvering rather than passive travel. The object appeared to be repositioning itself relative to Voyager, adjusting its orientation, perhaps circling the spacecraft at a distance, perhaps aligning itself for a purpose that has not yet been determined. And each time the object's position shifted, Voyager recorded corresponding changes in the local magnetic field. The two events were linked. The movement and the magnetic response were not coincidental. They were connected in a way that implied the object had a magnetic profile large enough to distort the surrounding plasma, and that it was using that capability, deliberately or otherwise, in a way that left a measurable signature on Voyager's instruments. After weeks of analysis, after exhausting every conventional explanation, after running every diagnostic and reviewing every alternative interpretation, NASA's mission team reached a conclusion that nobody wanted to put in writing, but nobody could responsibly avoid. Voyager 1, humanity's oldest and most distant spacecraft, had made contact with something. Not a planet, not a natural phenomenon, not a plasma artifact or a cosmic coincidence. An object. A highly advanced object operating in interstellar space, emitting structured communication, moving with deliberate intent, distorting magnetic fields, and responding to Voyager's transmissions on its own terms rather than on ours. An object with no detectable heat signature, no exhaust, no conventional propulsion output, no radiation profile that matches anything in any catalog ever compiled. Something that behaves like nothing built by human hands and nothing described by the physics we currently understand. Consider what Voyager actually is. It is a spacecraft built nearly 5 decades ago, with technology that predates the personal computer. It carries a golden record designed to introduce humanity to whatever might find it. Its power source is a steadily weakening nuclear battery. Its antenna points back at a blue dot 23 billion kilometers away. Its processors are slower than a digital watch. And this spacecraft, this ancient, barely functioning, completely unremarkable piece of 1970s engineering, has just become the first human-made object to receive a transmission from something that should not exist within any framework of physics we currently possess. Whatever is out there chose to respond to Voyager specifically. It ignored NASA's experiments. It waited for the spacecraft's consistent organic rhythm. It studied Voyager the way a scientist studies a specimen, with patience, with precision, and with a clear understanding of the difference between routine behavior and forced interaction. It moved around the spacecraft. It distorted its magnetic environment. It transmitted something structured and deliberate and organized, and then it went quiet again, leaving behind a data set that the world's most advanced space agency has been quietly, methodically, and very carefully trying to understand ever since. The universe just answered back. And Voyager 1, the machine that was never supposed to survive, the probe that outlived every prediction, the lonely ambassador that humanity sent into the dark without ever really expecting anyone to find it, is the only witness we have to what that answer looked like. The question now is not whether we are alone. The evidence from Voyager's instruments has already started to dismantle that assumption piece by piece. The question now is something far more unsettling. What happens next? And why is the agency responsible for our eyes in deep space being so very careful about what they're choosing to tell us?